And of course, know that enjoining the right and forbidding the wrong has these three dimensions. One of the heart, which is really, you can't see it, but the tongue, and with the hand. And with the hand, that is related to the amount of power we have where we can directly change something. This power, this practical power, is not always necessarily enacted by directly confronting something. Directly confronting something that is wrong is good, but it is also enacted by our behavior, which can fall under the idea or the reality of what we call sunnah. In other words, our behavior in society is one that can affect society and can change it. Now, when we investigate the word sunnah, the root verb is sanna. And sanna means institute a custom or a practice, from which we get the word sunnah, which is a practice instituted by someone. When we look at it this way, we realize that sunnah is not something just related to our prophet or the prophet. Sunnah is something that we all do. Sunnah is every action that we take that affects society, that people might find it attractive and practices it afterwards. Everybody has an influence upon other people by their actions, and them following upon that action is really what is called a sunnah. So after that person behaves in a certain way, that now becomes a sunnah when people after that person, in memory of that person, under the influence of the actions of that person, have created this particular type of practice. Let's take, for example, in a family where the mother and the father are always fighting, and the children see this. What happens? The children might tend to have that type of behavior in their relationship with their spouses. You started the sunnah. You were the ones fighting in front of your kids. Now they are doing it themselves. And guess what happens? Their children might end up behaving like this, and this continues. This is a negative sunnah. If you start praying, and you get up every morning on time to pray, and your children see you getting up every morning on time to pray with your spouse, and that when they reach a certain age, you wake them up to pray as well, not only are you practicing the sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they learn that sunnah from you. So you have a part to play in influencing them in that sunnah. You have people who want their children to read, but they themselves don't read. Their children don't see them pick up a book, turn the TV off, stop scrolling, and read. And so you find that children growing up in that household don't have an affinity towards reading because you did not establish that sunnah for the kids to see you reading. You see? And it goes on like this in many ways. I mean, for example, myself. I believe that the sunnah, we're not talking about the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it is related. My sunnah or my approach to Islam is very much like a Malcolm X approach to Islam, because he set the ball rolling for many of us African Americans and African Caribbean people who showed us that Islam was all about justice, was all about standing up against oppression. And so that popularity, that prestige of Islam that you find, you would find that people in the United States, African American people who are not Muslims, but who would trust a Muslim with their property, would trust a Muslim for their safety, would trust a Muslim for standing up for injustice. Because they know Muslims don't do this and they don't do that. They do something else. And that something else is noble, and they follow that. This is the kind of influence that people have on society. And so therefore, in discourses by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam about not acting against injustice, about not acting in honorable fashions and so forth, they are condemned by them. They are criticized by them because they are actually creating something that is contrary to the ultimate sunnah, the higher sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa alihi. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is quoted to have said, whoever establishes a good sunnah, that people follow after him, he will get his own reward for it, as well as the like of the reward for performing it without any decrease in the reward thereof. Meaning, if a person starts a good sunnah, see what he's saying? If a person starts a good sunnah, and people start to follow it, first of all, he gets the reward for starting a good sunnah, for doing something right. Secondly, that those people who follow him in that, he too will be rewarded for it, without any decrease in the reward for the person who is following the sunnah after him. And he said the contrary thing with respect to somebody who establishes an evil sunnah. He says that whoever establishes an evil sunnah that is followed by people after him, he will be responsible for the burden of that person's sins as well as the sins of others without any decrease, again, in the punishment thereof. So he starts a bad sunnah, he gets a negative mark against him, he will be punished for this, and anybody who carries out that same evil sunnah after him, he will also get a punishment for that too, without any decrease in the practicing of that person who is following him that comes after him. And so, we have to be very careful. Again, remember, akhlaq and Islamic practice, in terms of social practice, largely occurs in our immediate sphere. Unless you are a ruler or you are a famous actor or something like that, the people you affect are people who are next to you, the people who are in your family, your close friends, your co-workers, your fellow students, your neighbors on the street, and so forth. This is what affects people. I remember when I moved into my new neighborhood here in London, Christmas time came by. We moved in there, we didn't know anybody. Christmas time came around. And my wife and my kids decided to give chocolates to the people in the neighborhood. Tell them Merry Christmas. After that, their sense of alienation from us as Muslims went down very much. I leave my house, people are telling me hello, how are you doing, and that type of a thing. That's a good sunnah. We're not arguing about whether Christmas is real or not, and Christmas trees are this and that and the other. We are respecting their custom, and their custom is celebrating the birthday of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. But what it shows to them is that we are not alien from you. This is why, for example, I think we must encourage our children to be confident, Assalamu alaikum. To be confident, to excel in their studies, but not only that, in their environment to stand up against injustice, stand up for right, stand up for what is correct, and have no fear that they should come to you and say, you know what, they put me in detention because I spoke up about something. And you support them. You let them know that you are on their side. Another aspect of the sunnah, of a sunnah, which includes the sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that a sunnah is the active component of culture. Culture basically is a set of behaviors that are related to a particular worldview. That's what culture is. And so all cultures are identified by social and individual practices that are peculiar to that particular culture. All cultures reflect the deep principles of a religion. And sometimes those principles are expressed by taking elements out of your environment that are already there and repurposing them for our own ideological or purposes of our worldview. Let me give you an example about a masjid. One of the notable aspects of Islamic culture in a society are their masajid. The masajid are designed in a certain way that it becomes clear to the Muslims and non-Muslims that Islam is a presence in this environment. And for most of us, we see a masjid, we see a dome, we see minarets, for example, we see particular arches, and so forth and so on. But don't you know that the earliest masajid were basically quite simple? The Masjid al-Nabi in Medina was fundamentally a covered perimeter and in an open space in the middle without a roof. People prayed on the earth. They prostrated on the earth, under the sky. But this is Arabia, where it's dry for most of the year round. When Islam starts spreading north, going into wetter climes, encountering the Christian cultural practices of those areas, what they found were that the churches had domes. The domes didn't come from Islam. The dome came from Christianity. The Muslims took the dome and they adapted it to the design of a masjid. And why would the dome be so important? Well, architecturally speaking, the dome is more symbolic of the sky than any other structure. Not a triangular roof, not a flat roof. Everybody talks about the dome of the sky. It rises to the top and falls to the other side. And now the dome has become a symbol of Islamic culture, and rightly so. Similarly, the pointed arch, like arch windows, for example, is a innovation of Islamic culture. The Europeans going to the Muslim world in the time of the Crusades and in the times where, for example, they had interactions between the scholars of the West and the Muslim world and so forth, the Christians took the pointed arch and incorporated it in their own spiritual architecture. So what we're talking about here is culture being something dynamic. A lot of the original masajid in China, for example, were shaped like pagodas, reflecting that particular culture and adapting that culture to an Islamic expression. So therefore, we see how a sunnah is not only something that comes from you, but from your worldview, from your belief system. You could look at something and you can adapt that thing to your own particular expression of Islam. And it is for this reason that we find that even though the Muslims are united in their belief, united in their akhlaq, united in their sense of Islamic law and so forth, we find that in different Muslim cultural environments, because Islam is not a monoculture. Islam is a multiculture, reflecting the genius, reflecting the particular affinities of the people that practice that Islam. So you'd go to Indonesia and you would find both familiarity and wonder. This is how they dress in Indonesia. It's very different to how they dress in northern Nigeria. It's quite different to how they dress in Turkey and that type of thing. So culture is the outward expression, the outward practice that is conditioned by a belief system. We Muslims in the West are still in the process, and you can see it developing among us, where we tend to have a kind of a Western way of expressing Islam, which is very important. Why? Because the more it takes on certain positive aspects of Western culture that find resonance in Islam, the more familiar the outward environment would find Islam, and the faster Islam will be spread in this society. I remember that the first times that I was invited to give speeches and so forth were like in the, I would say, the early 90s. And guys like me, we would come to a place like this and have a little small room where they want to invite us to talk to the kids. A couple of university students might be there, or if you know, in some masajid, we have a tent outside. That's a tent for the youth, and we come and talk to the youth. Okay. Now here I am, you know, in the main hall. What is happening? The population is changing. An English presentation becomes sometimes even more important than the presentation from people from their home country. And not just a question of English in the formal sense, but also an English that takes into consideration the mubtalahun bay, the concerns of people within that particular environment. That is a cultural shift, and it is based upon that dynamic between the Muslim population and its environment. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. Thus, to change culture, it is important to change belief, to change that worldview, to try to make Muslims secular, for example, or make Muslims abandon their religion. What you have to do is to change your belief system. Is to change the belief in such a way that it no longer provides the intellectual basis and foundational principles for the belief. or for the religion. And you would find therefore what, people who would identify with Islam but don't practice Islam. Why? Because their practice itself and the fact that they orient themselves to the belief system of the society in which they find themselves has changed them from them being adherents to their own belief. This is what we call cognitive dissonance. This is an example of what they call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive meaning being able to see something, being able to experience something, and that experience goes against what you believe. And that accompanied by criticizing and condemning what you believe, it leads a person to conform themselves to the dominant negative culture that is affecting them, and their viewpoint changes. There was a very interesting experiment done in university, I can't remember exactly how long ago, where they took people who had very strong beliefs in something. Very strong belief. Let's say, for example, they take a Marxist, and they would take a Christian. And they would say, look, this is just an experiment. I want you to give the contrary point of view to an audience. So if you're a Muslim, for example, you give, let's say, a speech to a group of students that is, let's say, supporting Christianity or Zionism or something like that. Okay? You don't believe in it, but this is just an experiment. So you get up and you say something against what you believe in. And then people will ask you questions. And you should defend that statement that you said. After that, they found out that the people who did this, their original belief had become weakened. This is cultural dissonance. And when you look at the media, many of our young people looking at the media, many of older people even, looking at the media all the time and getting all these negative attitudes and negative ideas about Islam and so forth and so on, after a while it sets up a kind of a cognitive dissonance and your resistance becomes weakened. This is why parents, when you're watching the news on TV, where your kids are reading the newspaper or whatever, you got to be on top of this game. You have to also be checking that out and asking them questions, challenging what had been presented to them in order for them to be able to be critical as well, because you are actually overcoming or resisting cultural dissonance or cognitive dissonance. So to change a culture is to change the belief. You change the belief and you change the culture. And as from what we are saying, the reverse is also true. You change the behavior, you can also change the belief. And this is why the Sunnah is very important. The Sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a type of behavior that helps us reinforce our belief. A very good example of behaviors and experience changing people happened in the last World Cup in Qatar. I'm sure you might have seen and heard about people who, when they went into Muslim washrooms, they encountered the hose, the bidet kind of hose that they used there. And when they came back to England or America or wherever they were from, they said, I can't go back to what I used to do before. I've changed. They came into Qatar thinking that they were coming into an intolerant Muslim environment, and they encountered people who were polite, people who were welcoming. It changed their opinion about Muslims. They came into a place where even though you could drink in the hotel, you couldn't drink outside. You had people saying, I never knew that I could enjoy my team winning and us celebrating on the street without alcohol. This is changing people's belief, changing people's understanding by them submerging themselves or finding themselves in an environment that were based upon higher principles and realizing that those higher principles were ones that they resonated with. And just out of that experience, a lot of people said Shahadatain and became Muslim. This is why it's very important for you to invite your non-Muslim friends here. Because this is an environment where you have an Islamic ethos that is present that could have a very profound effect upon them. I think our people, our Shia people, I think we are kind of entrapped in this idea that we are foreigners, that we are guests of the king, that we are a weak minority, and these types of debilitating thoughts that do not give us the courage to be able to project in our environment. And I believe it comes from what I would call historical trauma. Historical trauma. We come from a school of thought that in many of our home countries were ones that were greeted with open hostility, threats, challenges, and so forth, that made us become introverted. And so, when let's say a Salafi goes to university, what he's thinking about is, how do I make all of these people Salafi? When we go to university, we go to somebody who's wearing a ring that is a kick, because you don't know if he's a Shia or not, and you say, where do you guys do Dua Komel? Oh, up there. Okay. And we have to come out of that. Because in this environment, it is an open bazaar of ideas. And we have the most complete ideas, the most complete philosophy that we could put on that table and bring people to Islam. So since Islam is the most perfect religion, we have the most perfect sunnah in the sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How we express it, how we present it, has to do partially with the environment that we find ourselves in. When we can have that hamohangi, they say in Farsi, this harmony in terms of using these elements, like language and so forth, then we could be able to have an Islamic culture that is both Islamic and also culturally resonant with our environment on the higher level, not on the lower level. There's a statement by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says there is, in response to a question by one of his companions, he says, there's nothing that the offspring of Adam needs except that it has been expounded in the practices set by Allah and His Messenger. Otherwise, Allah would not have the argument over us. And the question was, what is the argument of Allah? And he replied, Al-yawm akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati. Today I have perfected your religion for you, and I have completed my blessings upon you. Now when we look at the situation with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, what we find is a kind of cultural dissonance. We find Yazid under the title of the Khalif, the successor to the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this Yazid is flouting the Sunnah. This Yazid is not acting according to Islam. This Yazid is unjust. This Yazid is corrupt. But he is the successor to the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a cultural dissonance. And this is why Imam Hussein alayhi salam rose up. At a time when most of the people knew that he was a better person than Yazid. Remember his statement, a man like me will never give allegiance to a man like Yazid. And this is something that we have to be living in our days, every day. This is the meta history of Karbala. When in school, they want to impose upon us about gender ideology. We say, a person like me will never acknowledge something like that. And if you are going to be attacked, if you are going to be persecuted, if you're going to lose your job, remember that Shahada is a continuum. The highest of Shahada is the loss of your life. But in between that, it's loss of your income, it's social ostracism, it's all of these things that you lose, that you are dependent upon. And herein lies the fault of Ahl Kufa, because they were not prepared to face the hardship that would come for the support for the truth. They were not prepared for the hardship that comes from commanding what is right and forbidding what is wrong. So if they were not prepared for that, how could they be prepared for losing their lives on the battlefield? There are many hadith by the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, where they say when you abandon commanding the right and forbidding the wrong, you yourself will lose. You yourself will become a worse person. You yourself will become a worse person. And this is what we see with the Ahl Kufa. Their hearts were with Imam Hussein, and their swords were against him. By the time they started wielding those swords, they were the army of the shaitan. They were the people who were themselves now calling for his blood. This is the result of not commanding the right and not commanding the wrong. We have been condemned if we rely upon other people to do this. We've been condemned because we are the ones who are supposed to do it, because we are the ones who are supposed to know what we should do. And I give this to you and I give this to me, that in this time that we are living in the forces of evil are becoming more and more desperate. And they are trying harder and harder to spread their corruption. And where they are starting now is your children. Where they're starting now is your children. And now is the time, no later, that we have to think together about preventing this calamity, because you do not want shayateen in your house. Today I'd like to end my talk by speaking about the last glorious shaheed before the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein alayhi salam cries out after the death of Abbas, "Who is there to help me?" We, 1,000 years later, say, "I am the one who is there to help you, Ya Hussein." It is said that when he cried that out, Ali Asghar started to cry in his tent. He fell out of his cot. He went to the tent, and Zainab was in the tent, and Zainab said to him, "Ali Asghar, when he heard you cry out for to smile." That's when they bring joy to your heart, because they're smiling with you. Ali Asghar starts to smile. Imam Hussein tells Zainab, "Put on some nice clothes on him. Let me take him out to in front of the troops, see if I can get some water for him." Some say when he spoke to Ali Asghar, he said to Ali Asghar, "You want to be a martyr too? You want to go on the battlefield too? And you fight with like all of us?" And this is why Ali Asghar smiled. And so Imam Hussein alayhi salam wraps up Ali Asghar in a cloth, and he comes out on the battlefield, and the troops are saying, "What does Hussein have in this cloth? Is it Quran? He wants to use Quran to be able to argue his way out of this?" And then he uncovers Ali Asghar, and he says to them, "Look, you have a beef with me. You're the ones that want me. What has this little child done to you? Why not give him some water? He hasn't had water for 3 days." He said, "Okay, you think I want to drink the water? I'm going to put Ali Asghar on the ground, and I'm going to retreat, and you take him and you feed him." Ali Asghar turns to his face towards the troops, and he opens his lips, his parched lips, and passes his dry tongue on his lips, as if to do a jihad with his tongue and his mouth. And the consternation starts among the troops. Some of the troops, they themselves had children. They had arguments among them. Umar ibn Sa'ad saw this and saw that Ali Asghar was creating with his little jihad a change in the hearts of the people. And he said that he ordered Hormala to fire arrows, and the arrows stopped short on the ground, and Imam Hussein picked up Ali Asghar. Umar ibn Sa'ad told Hormala, "End Hussein's argument. Silence Hussein." Hormala, it says, fired 3 arrows towards him, but the 2 first arrows missed. And why? Is because he saw a woman standing in the distance, and he figured that it was the mother of this baby. But that cruel man, he put a 3-pronged arrow in his hand, and he steadied his aim, and it is said that the arrow penetrated the heart of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and shattered the neck of Ali Asghar. Ali Asghar smiled. Imam Hussein was thinking about putting the blood, letting the blood flow on the ground. The ground says, "I cannot accept this blood." He wanted to throw the blood into the sky. The sky said, "We cannot accept this blood," because of the holiness of it, the injustice that was done to it. And so he smeared the blood on his face. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he was taking all of the bodies back to the tent. He had doubts. He was worried. He was afraid because of the horror the pain that would cause the mother of Ali Asghar. He moved forwards and backwards, saying, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And he brought Ali Asghar to his mother. His mother wept profusely. Then Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the mother of Ali Asghar dug a grave to bury Ali Asghar. Why did he dig a grave to bury Ali Asghar? He didn't dig a grave for anybody else to bury anybody. Only Ali Asghar. It is only later that we know. After they collected all of the heads, they say, one head is missing. There's a baby's head is missing, and they started to probe the ground to find Ali Asghar's body. And then they found it, and they did the most horrible of acts. They decapitated Ali Akbar and put his head on a spear. Inna lillah wa inna illahi raji'un. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa arwahi allati hallat bi fina'ik. Alayka minni salamullahi abada ma baqit wa baqiya al-layl wa an-nahar. Assalamu ala